Hello. Today I'll be speaking about the nature of homelessness in New York State using point-in-time count data from 2020. During this presentation, we'll be discussing three things: where homelessness is happening in New York State, who is experiencing homelessness, and what you can do to help. While we can use PIT data to help us answer those three questions, it is important to keep equity in mind. Now more than ever, communities are becoming more willing to keep equity in mind when creating systems to alleviate and end homelessness. Therefore, it is important to recognize the disparities in our community's homeless populations in order to be effective advocates. Knowledge of racial, gender, and other types of discrimination will help you better serve those in need. As I mentioned earlier, the statistics in this presentation will come from the point-in-time count data. This PIT count data is a survey of sheltered and unsheltered people experiencing homelessness on a single night in January. Last year, this count was not conducted in many CLCs because of COVID, so I'm using the data collected in 2020 for this presentation. To start, we're going to go over homelessness in the US as a whole. In terms of overall numbers, California, New York, and Florida had the highest homelessness counts in 2020. However, when adjusted for population, the rankings changed slightly. States like California and New York still had high amounts, but places like Washington and Washington, D.C., Hawaii, and Oregon also stood out. For New York State in particular, we see that most of the homelessness is concentrated within New York City. Besides New York City, other CLCs in the Capital Region and Hudson Valley region also had significant rates of homelessness when compared with the rest of the state. And we'll explore this more in the next slide. Overall, however, New York State has a 95% sheltered homelessness rate, which is in large part due to the state's right to shelter mandate. This law requires the state to provide temporary emergency shelter to everyone who needs it and is eligible for services each and every night. On this slide, we can see the top 5 CLCs in New York State with the highest homelessness rates per 10,000 people. New York City has the highest rate at about 94 people experiencing homelessness for every 10,000 people. And the other CLCs shown here have rates ranging from 20 to 28 people per 10,000. While New York City has the highest rate of homelessness in New York State, it also has approximately 650 sites that give shelter to people experiencing homelessness. This allows the city to provide shelter to a majority of its homeless population. In 2020, there were about 15,000 families experiencing homelessness in New York State. Within those families, there were nearly 48,000 people. In comparison, there are only 43,000 individuals experiencing homelessness alone in New York State in that same year. When we look at the gender breakdown of these two groups, we see that there is a pretty stark difference. For individuals, men make up about 70% of the people experiencing homelessness. However, within families, men only account for 39% of the population. According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, families who experience homelessness are usually led by a single woman with young children. This is in line with the data gathered in 2020, as 58% of people experiencing homelessness with their families were under the age of 18. Fortunately, almost all families that were surveyed in the 2020 PIT count in New York State were sheltered. Only 6 people and families were unsheltered during this count. Homeless youth, sometimes referred to as unaccompanied youth, are individuals under the age of 25 who lack parental, foster, or institutional care. In the 2020 PIT count, a total of 3,072 unaccompanied youth were counted in New York State. Most of those were between the ages of 18 to 24. However, a small percentage were under the age of 18. When looking at the racial demographics of these young people, we see that some races and ethnicities are overrepresented. This is especially true of Black and Hispanic homeless youth. Unfortunately, this is in line with the racial makeup of the homeless population in the state as a whole, something I will touch on more in the next slide. According to the Pitt Count data, unaccompanied youth in New York State also had an unsheltered rate that was actually higher than the overall unsheltered rate in New York State. They have an unsheltered rate of about 9.86% versus the statewide rate of 5%. So even though New York State has a pretty good track record with ensuring its homeless populations are housed, there is still some more work to be done. There's also more work to be done in closing racial disparities within the homeless population. In New York State, some races experience homelessness at a much higher rate than others. This is largely due to long-standing historical and structural discrimination in employment, education, and housing that were meant to keep them in poverty. One of the most striking disparities can be found in the overrepresentation of Black Americans. In the 2020 Pitt Count, Black Americans accounted for 68.15% of those experiencing homelessness in New York State, while only accounting for 14.6% of the state's population. However, it is important not to think about these forms of discrimination as things of the past. A 2020 study done by HUD on racial discrimination found that people of color were often shown fewer rental units by property managers and denied more leases in comparison to their white counterparts. Additionally, white people were more likely to be offered lower rents and have deposits and other move-in costs quoted as negotiable. Similar discrimination is also present in housing appraisals and sales. However, counting the real number of people experiencing homelessness is difficult. One of the downfalls of the Pitt Count is that it only counts people who are seen by the surveyors. But what about those that aren't seen? These uncounted people experiencing homelessness are called the hidden homeless, and there are many reasons why they are so hard to count. Some live in the homes of family or friends, staying as long as they are allowed and moving on to another home when they're told to leave. They never reach out to any homelessness services and are therefore never counted. Some of them are homeless children. They hide so they don't get in trouble, conceal the truth from those around them, and never hang out with anyone who asks too many questions. Others are homeless in rural areas. They camp in the woods, campgrounds, cars, and abandoned farms or buildings that are hard to reach. Others still just don't trust the government and are not willing to be helped or counted by them. This is important to note because funding for homelessness is often based off the size of the homeless population. So if there are less people that are counted than those who actually need help, agencies and organizations will not have the right amount of funding. So what can you, as board members, do, besides the great work that you're already doing? First and foremost, you can stay informed. Actively look out for reports or articles that will update you on the latest news about people experiencing homelessness and the services that help them. You can look at the yearly HUD reports, HUD Exchange webinars and trainings, CARES newsletters and blogs, and also articles from trusted news sources about strides being made to prevent homelessness in other states or COCs. Doing this will help you be an advocate in your work, as it will help you to think about how the work you are doing can better go about achieving equitable outcomes. But most of all, you can keep engaging with CARES. Stay up to date on our initiatives that our staff are leading and learn about all the changes, big or small, that are happening within our state. Read our Racial Justice and Homelessness blog, where we've highlighted activists throughout history and the work they've done. Or learn more about the Regional Advisory Board on Youth Homelessness, which brings together youth-based agencies from around the region to discuss issues and youth services. You could even use your personal network to help us better the initiatives we already have. The CDPHP Housing Resources Initiative is a great example of this. I'm told that with the help of some of our board members, we've been able to create a wonderful partnership with CDPHP, where if someone who is seeking homelessness services is also a CDPHP member, CDPHP will be notified and will continue to follow up with that person to ensure that they also have easy access to health services whenever they need it. Thank you for listening to this presentation and for being a part of this board. If you have any questions, please check out the caresnewyork.org website as well as the references listed in the following slides.